I think we can kick it off. Awesome. So hello and welcome to Wake Up Wellesley, part 1 of 4. My name's Liliana and I graduated from Wellesley High in 2019. My friend Kayla Reed, class of 2018, and I created this biweekly series of 4 conferences to incite a community-wide discussion about what Wellesley's ongoing commitment to ending racism will look like. Our vision for the culmination of this project is the creation of a standing committee comprised of passionate community members. Through biweekly or monthly meetings, the committee will constitute one of the town's permanent commitments to constantly improving how we address and work to eradicate racism. In today's panel style presentation, Kayla will be offering questions about what racism looks like in Wellesley to our 6 speakers. Our speakers are all graduates of Wellesley High School who, while there, were passionately involved in promoting acceptance and inclusivity as members of Young Ethnic Scholars, also known as YES, outspoken participants in diverse American voices, or simply initiating conversations about race among their friends and peers. Our next session on Tuesday, June 30th at 6 p.m. will be a more interactive discussion covering such topics as how we can invest in our Black students and what action steps we can take to ensure our Black students feel supported and know that we stand in solidarity with them, not only right now, but in perpetuity. For example, teaching a more comprehensive Black history in our public schools beginning in kindergarten and making literature by Black authors a centerpiece of our English language literature curricula. So a little bit on the format of this first forum, you will see the chat function, which I see some of you have already found, to the right of this video live stream, and it's been enabled for the audience to drop questions and comments. I'll be monitoring the chat and passing them on to Kayla, who will be mediating our discussion and relaying prompts to our speakers as appropriate. I'm very excited by the size of our virtual audience, and I'm especially grateful for the participation, generosity, and bravery of our brilliant speakers today. So thank you all for being here, and with that, I'll hand it off to Kayla.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Kayla Reed. As Liliana said before, I graduated Wellesley High School, class of 2018, and I will be a rising junior transferring to UMass Amherst. Along with our fellow panelists, we have Bogani, who is going to be a rising junior at NYU University, Shanghai. We have Zoe, who's going to be incoming freshman at Howard University. We have Alex, who's going to be a rising sophomore at Williams College. Yasmin, a rising freshman at American University. Julia, a rising sophomore at Columbia University. And Kalia, a rising freshman at University of Rhode Island, and Sierra, a rising freshman at Boston College. I'm going to begin with our first question. When was your first experience with racism?
I think with that's a tough question. I mean, something like that, it's something that you might have experienced without even knowing, right? It's like you could have had an entire interaction where someone was being entirely racist, but because if you gave them the benefit of the doubt, and you expected of them to be kind and respectful to you, you wouldn't have expected that circumstance to arise. But then also, on the other hand, they may not have known that they were, I guess, being racist. And what's interesting is that I grew up in South Africa, so my experience personally might be different to some of the other panel members, but it's, growing up as a kid, most of those experiences are purely out of either jest or curiosity. So you kind of have to approach it with a different sort of mindset than if you were approaching someone who was purely being racist. And I would say that's just, a case of like kids asking questions or treating you differently because they know you're Black, or yeah. Well, and that might be a manifestation of what their parents taught them or how they were treated individually. But yeah, that's from my experience.
Do you blame yourself for racism or letting racism happen and not stopping it when you have encountered it or felt it?
This is an interesting question, only because I feel like I have blamed myself for certain situations, like with racism, only because sometimes I think like if I had not put myself in a situation where I know I'm going to be the only Black person, and knowing that there's a high chance that someone might say something or do something towards me, like I take the blame for that piece of it. Um, and I know it's not right, and like people should not follow that kind of logic because it's not okay. And like, but I do find myself more upset when I see other people, especially younger Black students, experiencing racism and whatnot within like any situation. So that might just be a personal thing, but that's my experience with that.
I can say that I do in some way like kind of blame myself for like like I don't know how to explain it, but kind of like being like selfish and pursuing my career and like going to college and leaving the Wellesley community, knowing what's going on and like kind of willfully doing it for my satisfaction, but also for like my like future and like what I want to do, knowing that like there are children who are generations younger than me or are a year younger than me that I can't do the work that I need to do for them. And I can say that like in middle school, I did kind of blame racism on myself and like the situations that I was in on myself because of a particular person that was supposed to be a guidance, supposed to be a figure for me. And that individual told me many times that it was my fault and I deserved the things that were coming for me.
When having, you can speak.
Sorry, I was just gonna say, I necessarily don't blame myself for like that it happened, but I think it's more of like how I react. And if I don't do something to like cause it to stop there, then I feel bad. Or if I react in a way that's like very impulsive and I maybe say something to the person. I know this has happened before where an incident happened and then I yelled at them and I said things that I shouldn't have necessarily. And I realized that that almost took away from what I was saying and trying to prove my point. So that's where I feel like I'm to blame sometimes.
When dealing with racist events in school or just forms of racism, how well do you think Wellesley Public Schools handles them?
Not well.
I can speak to that. I genuinely think that they don't handle it well at all. I know for students of color, they're like whenever they get in trouble, they often get a worse repercussion rather than their white students who do almost the same type of thing. And that's something that really needs to change at this school. And also when I was in the first grade, there was a girl called me, like said that my skin reminded me of dirt. So she wanted me to move to the other side of the lunch table. And I told the principal about it and nothing was done about it. And I think that it all starts in like elementary school. And that is when we need to teach these young people right from wrong and how to deal with microaggressions like that. And the repercussions that need to be taken with these young children need to be serious, because if you don't change it then it just gets worse with age. So that's just my point of view.
I feel like Wellesley has a kind of like a fear of being called too liberal, and sometimes they blur like racism and politics for some odd reason. And they think like, I feel like their go-to move is to like sweep it under the rug, do like the bare minimum, and then just move past it. And I mean, that's about it. I think that just characterizes how they treat racist incidents. Like, I feel like they're doing the bare minimum to keep people happy, but not like really going and making a change. And like, especially with like the removal of the MECO room because it's exclusionary, like that's treating a symptom. That's not treating like the cause, which is that Black people don't feel welcome. Like, anyways.
Yeah, going off what Julie just said, I just feel like we talk about these big racist events when they happen for a day, maybe 2 days, and then we just act like we're back to normal, and we don't actually do anything to educate people on what they're saying wrong or what they've been doing wrong. And it's just like we don't spend enough time actually caring to really make the change, and we just try to address the incidents when they happen, and as opposed to really addressing the problem.
I also think that oh wait, no, you go.
All right, cool. I had an instance where one of my classmates, one of my friends, was incredibly racist online, and it kind of blew up into a whole thing. And that circumstance for me sort of captures how Wellesley deals with these issues, because it's convenient in a sense to deal with something upfront and immediately, but especially if your demographic doesn't necessarily line up in a way that makes it the majority issue, you're not going to necessarily keep that up for a long time. I will say that the way Dr. Chisholm handled that situation and a bunch of other people handled that situation was incredibly impressive. Their heart was in the right place, and the things that they did were, to the fullest extent, what they believed they could do in order to best remedy the situation, which was, through reconciliation, discussion, and then proceeding, with a sort of punishment, and then something that would deal with it in the immediate sense. But something my father realized was that it would cut off, like kind of like what Alex is saying, where it's no longer an issue once you've dealt with it and provided consequences. It's kind of like what we're going through right now, where people are worried that social media is switching, right? It's something that will stop once you feel as though it's been, in a circumstance has been dealt with, but the issue wouldn't have been rid of. And so he tried to put forward an essay in which kids could write. Every year they would have an opportunity to win some cash if they were able to articulate why racism doesn't work and shouldn't exist in this society, right? And so that's just that's an example of something that is long lasting, but it's only really put forth with incentive. So I think that one of the biggest reasons why Wellesley High School doesn't necessarily succeed in this department is because they simply don't necessarily have the incentive, because it is not the majority issue. That's how I see it.
Like adding on to what everyone's been saying, Wellesley also, like, I just want to say, like, the public school system in itself, like, always uses the people who are actually doing the work as a clutch kind of like situation. Like, for example, a lot of the time, like, yes is used as a clutch to save the school's image in a lot of instances where it shouldn't be. And a lot of the time it's children doing the work of what adults should be doing. Not children, but like people who are not getting paychecks for what they should be, like what they're doing for the community and their school. And it's also like the school kind of makes it a big deal for, like, what everyone's saying, it makes it a big deal for like 1 or 2 days, and then everyone acts like it never happened.
To add on, like, I completely agree with Sierra. And to also add on to that, I think that from when I started high school and how I'm ending it, I think that at least Dr. Chisholm and certain individuals within the school system are doing better with how they respond to racist situations. And I can give an example of, like, my freshman year, a white student decided to record a Black teacher, his only Black teacher, and post it on social media without her knowledge. And it was right after the Trump elections and stuff. And so he thought it was funny to, like, antagonize her, but for her to not know about it. And we brought it to the administration, like some of the assistant principals, and I was told to delete the video after they were made aware of it. And not all of them. There was like one particular assistant principal. And so, like, in that situation, that's not how you deal with it. And actually the teacher didn't even get to see the video until they asked me again for the video, and I found it in my, like, deleted files. And so like that's an example of like them not dealing with the situation in the appropriate way. And from senior year, I do find that Dr. Chisholm and certain administrators are doing a better job of how they're handling situations. And even though they're using yes and like other students and teachers to improve the situation and consult us, I think overall it's better, but it's not where it needs to be.
Yeah, I totally agree with Yasmin. We would have weekly meetings with Dr. Chisholm or bicycle. But yeah, a lot of the time, the only way that we found a solution happening was if we got a lot of students together and then went to administration directly and said, this is what we want to see happening, and we want to actually see what happens to the student that has committed the racist act. Otherwise, it's pretty much easier for like the administration to dismiss one student. So I think that needs to change, and that it shouldn't have to take a whole group of students coming up to them and saying what's wrong. They should, deal with any situation regardless of the amount of students.
Yeah, also adding on to Zoe's point, like just this year, this girl like she's a freshman, and these kids were following her around the school and like harassing her into answering a question, like making her like switch her answer to a racially charged question. And they also like a couple times did say the N-word to her, and it until we said something as a bunch of students, until we actually, I think at one point we took it into our own hands, they actually started paying attention and they actually started to do stuff.
Have you ever felt racially profiled or discriminated against? And this can be described either outside of the school in the town of Wellesley or from the towns where you are from within the school. Have you ever felt different, been treated differently by teachers based on the color of your skin and like the additional help? Like if you were in an LC, for example, have you ever felt different from anybody or treated differently?
I so right, my twin sister is more like stereotypically biracial looking, and the way we like our experiences have been shaped by the color of our skin is like I don't know, it's like the biggest like social experiment that Wellesley failed. Like the way when my sister did bad, they weren't like, oh, maybe there's something wrong. They just shoved her into all CP classes and put her in LC before she even was diagnosed with a disability. And like it was just, I feel like it would like my experience has just like, it's just been like a daily reminder of how much white privilege there is in Wellesley. So
Also adding on to that, I have like two different like kind of like story things, but so like in elementary school, my second grade teacher kind of neglected me as like a student, and I think at the time I was the only person of color in that class specifically. And so one time she tried to tell my parents I couldn't read and I needed help reading. So my mom came in and brought the principal with her, and she had me read a book in front of the principal, multiple books, and the teacher was still trying to say I couldn't read and I needed to get like a learning center, or I needed to go speak to someone to get diagnosed because I had a problem. And then my mom got really mad, and I read like 4 different books right in front of the teacher, and it took that for the principal to be like, oh no, she needs to stay in the class, she doesn't need like the help. And then eventually I was put into a learning center. And my freshman year, my learning center teacher like thought I had an attitude, because every time like I was in class, I would just stare at the wall because I had nothing to do. Like I finished all the work before everyone did. Like did my homework. I had nothing to do, and they weren't allowing me to watch Netflix or anything. And so he made me go see a psychiatrist because I was staring at the wall and having an attitude. So yeah.
Yeah, I have an example more so from the town itself, not the school, but when I was in ninth grade, I was walking up the street with two of my friends. We were literally 3 houses down from my house, and a cop comes up and he's like, "What are you boys doing here? Like, the neighbors don't like it when you go door to door." And we were handing my neighbor a flyer for a basketball camp we were running. And so it was just so crazy to me. That was, I guess, the first experience with the police kind of racially profiling me. And it was 2 Black friends, I should add. And so it was just, especially for us being that young, like we didn't know what was going on. Like we were scared, like especially my friends, being in an almost all white neighborhood, with the police coming up to stop us for walking down the street.
I have one similar to Sierra's. So in Rice Street this year, my teacher, I'm sure you guys know who the teacher is, but he would constantly say that I looked angry during class because my face was neutral and I was just staring off into the distance. But I loved that class more than anything. It's like in life. And it kind of hurt that he always kept saying I looked angry and I needed to put a smile on my face when I was happy. I just didn't need to be smiling and jumping. Unlike some of the other people that were in my class being extra, like I just was enjoying myself, but in a different way. And it took until there was a racial equity meeting that all the teachers had to go to, and it covered how a neutral Black face can be associated with anger more often than any other race. And he came up to me and he apologized to me about it, like alone and in front of the class. And I understood why he felt bad and apologized. He had good intentions behind it, but it was still something that affected me and bothered me. I left the class crying one day because he kept saying it and it really bothered me. So yeah.
I have one experience as well. When I was, I don't really talk about this because it actually really bothered me when I was first starting out. But my sophomore year, I went to a school sponsored event with a couple of teachers, and then there were 2 other students. And during that time, there was a teacher I didn't really know, but I had an English teacher who I knew pretty well. And she came up to the both of us and was like, "Oh, is this she was like, I bet your teacher is hard or whatever." And then I was like, okay, I don't really know how to respond. And then after a while, as the conversation progressed, she said, "It's kind of like you're the slave and then ex teacher is a slave master." And I remember that experience, and I can never get that out of my head. I remember that forever. And it was a very it actually bothered me. And then a couple of days afterwards, I see her, I put it out of my mind really, because I was kind of this is way too much for me. And so then a couple of days later, she comes up to me and she's like, "Hey, can I speak to you tomorrow during advisory?" And I was like, "Sure." And then she started crying and apologizing to me. And then at that point, I felt guilty for what she did, weirdly enough. And it's kind of that white fragility moment. And so that was one of the most big experiences of my high school experience with racism.
Keeping on the topic of race, are there any microaggressions that just really boil your blood, or as some of the ladies in this chat have mentioned about being called angry or having an attitude, and that is in terms of being the typical angry Black woman? And how do you respond to that, if you respond to that, or what action can be done to prevent being called an angry Black woman or having attitude or other microaggressions?
I was always made to feel like the whiter I looked, the prettier I was. When I straightened my hair, all of my white friends would be like, "Oh my God, your hair is so much prettier that way. Like you should have it like that all the time." And it was just like, it was just so clear to me that like the whiter I looked, that is when I like hit their beauty standards.
For like, I don't think there's really anything for like, I don't want to place blame on like like the people that are receiving the racist like comments towards them or behaviors, only because like it's that individual's fault for like having those ideas in their head for the anyway. So like, I don't know if there's anything that you can really do, or like, I just don't want to place blame on an individual that receives that kind of treatment because it's not their fault. Like if I have a blank face, why are you calling me angry? Or like if like, you know, that's like your perception and that's like the stereotypes you're taking in about Black women. And so it's their fault and the responsibility should be placed on them.
I can't necessarily speak to what the Black female experience, but one of the worst ones for me was the statement that I wasn't necessarily Black enough, or like I was an Oreo or a coconut based off of how I behaved. And I think the reason why it bothered me so much is because it reduced the Black identity to such a small, confined box, when the reality is behavior doesn't necessarily define anything, or skin color really should not be used as a measure for behavior, to the extent of which you can't even necessarily be from a different country, right? So when I came from South Africa, accent, all that, I was like sticking out like a sore thumb. It even became hard for me to relate to the Metco kids, ABC kids, because I was so different. And then that made it, what made it even worse was now, you know, in a behavioral sense, people were regarding me as a whiter kid. I could hang out with whiter kids because of that. And so it was devastating in that now you don't necessarily know how to operate. There's also like the other way of saying it where you're not Black enough, right? And it reduces then the entirety of Africa into not Black enough, which is like ugly at its finest. And I think that yeah, that for me, you know, it's a microaggression in the sense that someone's trying to create an identity out of you, which really they have no jurisdiction or no ability to do. And so so yeah, I think that, and that's something that's is still very apparent in my life, you know, being even in, because I study in China. So when I go to China, they have the African American idea of what it means to be Black. So basketball, whatever, food, they all those assumptions have been used to calculate what kind of person I would be within their society, when the reality is there's much more to the possibility of who I could be within their society based off of the truest Black identity. And it ultimately provides a limitation for me, because now what am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to operate? And ultimately, I do believe that it shouldn't matter, you know, your actions based off of what other people think. But that's something that I have had to experience and hash out within my life. So, yeah.
If you can speak to current elementary school teachers, what will you tell them about how you can ensure the future WPS grads that they're not going to have the same heartbreaking stories or the same experiences?
I would probably just tell them to try to be better people, acknowledge the differences and celebrate them, and kind of teach so that everyone sees themselves in your teaching, and that everyone values themselves in your teaching, and that one student isn't seen as a victim and the other seen as a conqueror. Like they all see themselves as kings and queens. They all see themselves as like potentially good people in society, and they're not always brought down. But also stopping children in their tracks when they're talking, like when they're making those microaggressions, and telling them that it's wrong, because it honestly just starts when you're little. It starts in elementary school. And I can't even explain to you enough how much hatred a child has at that time if they're constantly told from the day they enter kindergarten to the day they leave in 5th grade the things that I was told.
Something we brought up, discussing this before, was that how do you educate kids about this sort of thing? How do you educate kids about slavery, and when does that begin? And I think that we went over the idea that the Black history, the Black identity is so minuscule because people have refined it to such a small extent. Like it's just slavery and onwards in school. That's all we had to learn in school. When the reality is there's so much more to the Black creation, Black excellence, and people who have contributed to the progress within society. So if we put an emphasis on that, it ultimately makes the weight of what slavery was and the ugliness of it that much worse, because now you know what it did to such an amazing and highly capable race. And so really, I'm a strong believer in the idea of pushing a sort of transformation in the extent to which we teach about Black people in our schools. More education regarding, some positive and more meaningful aspects of Black history and the Black identity. I think that will do a lot of good in the minds of kids as they grow up with, either being Black or, because that's another thing I wanted to speak to. I felt like my skin was crawling whenever we had that discussion at school, because it felt like, I was like the exhibit A, the representative of the whole, thing. And so afterwards it would feel like, now I had to be a historical professor discussing it with my mates, when really I'm learning about this with you as well. And it's almost scary because that's me. I remember having, the thought, like, what like sort of damage does it do to your perception of self being in a society like that, where you are constantly being, that pressure being put on you with regards to having your identity defined in a certain way. But I don't think it's entirely disappeared just yet, because your identity is still being scrutinized and watched, and based off of your education, you're being taught about one of the worst parts of your history, or your people's history, constantly. So I don't think it's necessarily conducive to a Black child's development within the system, the way they're doing it right now. Though it is important, and it must be taught well, it must be taught correctly. So yeah, that's something I'd speak to.
Also adding on to that, we need to not just adding on to what Bobo was saying, stop teaching just about slavery or MLK or Rosa Parks, because I learned that 6 different times in school. Is that completely necessary? No, we need to stretch out what we're talking about, and we need to stop victimizing Black people in our teachings.
Yeah, going off of that, I talked to the group about this yesterday, but when I was a senior, last year when I was a senior, I was talking to a friend about how we don't really teach enough about Black history, and he was telling me we do. And one of the things he said to me was talking about how he learned that Malcolm X was a Black Panther, and that was just a perfect example for me to say to him, that's a great example of how we're not teaching enough. The fact that we don't know enough about some of these important historical figures. Some of them because I guess the school doesn't want to teach that side of it. They only want to teach, the peaceful side of the Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement, and showing Black people getting beaten in the streets instead of showing some of the other examples of people who kind of took matters into their own hands, and some of the positives of being Black in America. I think it's just
not only that, it's that Black people are not only in Africa, that whole continent, or in America. We can spread, Blackness it's so much beyond that. I think, for example, I have 2 parents that are from the Caribbean, and I have 0 knowledge of Caribbean history. You know what I mean? And so Blackness is not only somebody came from Africa, stole your ancestors, and then they plopped up in the Caribbean for a hot second, and then they came to America, and like that's where mainly everyone is like from. Like that's not like, it's interesting on like how like as a Caribbean American, like I have no idea about like my own history and like my own culture in that sense, and like being brought up into history and in the classroom.
The one thing I was gonna say is that I was definitely taught that Malcolm X was like a villain, basically, which like, and I didn't really unlearn that until like late high school. And for elementary school teachers, I think the big thing that I want them to be thinking about is how they kind of target young Black kids and like the hyper criminalization of them. Like there's some statistic that I'd have to look up. I don't have it on hand, but it's like it starts in kindergarten where like they're like 4 times Black young students are 4 times more likely to get suspended, out of school punishment than white kids. And that is 100% true for me and my sister's experience. She didn't get expelled or suspended, but she would go to the principal's office all the time. And I my whole career have never been to the principal's office. And we're pretty similar people. We definitely both don't like causing trouble. So I just think that's definitely something to be noted.
Yeah, I agree with Julia. I've always noticed that sometimes teachers will treat Black kids or just kids that, you know, of our color a certain way. And it's almost like maybe they don't think that they can reach the full potential as every other student. So they'll kind of like almost baby them, or they'll just dismiss them. I've always noticed that, and I thought it was so weird. So I guess I would just say, treat every kid with like equally, you know, just let them all learn. I don't know, just let them learn the same way. Like don't hold them back based on their skin color, because every student should have the opportunity to go to school and learn. So I just always found that really stupid.
I think it's about like examining your own biases. Like I think there are a lot of teachers that just like expect Black kids to act out, and so as soon as a Black kid is acting out, it's like, let me get them. Versus like white kids are acting out too, but like they're not expected to, so they're not getting punished right away, you know? So I think it's just examining those biases is like the first step. Reading, educating yourself, those things.
Going back to the topic of slavery and the civil rights movement, do you think that the schools are scared to teach beyond slavery in the civil rights movement?
Yeah, because education is key. You give someone the knowledge that they were like worth gold, essentially. They were powerful people. They did this, that, and the third. They aren't villains. They aren't evil people. They aren't naturally bad. They aren't animalistic. You teach them that, like all the good things. You teach Black people like they are white, and then they're gonna act like they're gonna be equal to you. And I think that's like the point, like that our system is built against the success of Black people, because you're teaching them that they're victims constantly. So psychologically, you're gonna feel like a victim and you're gonna become that statistic. Not necessarily not gonna like, oh, that's not always what happens, but like that's what generally happens. And then you like start the cycle all over again. If you teach people their worth and all their like knowledge and all the good things about their history, now you have competition. And white people don't want competition. They don't want Black people to succeed.
And adding on to that, it's like interesting because if you tell like a Black person that they're like worth it, and that like you teach them about their history, then like that whole system of oppression doesn't work in the same way, because when you have internalized racism, you're feeding into the system of oppression. And so when you're feeding into a system of oppression, it's going to last even longer. And that's how it works. And so when a Black person doesn't have that internalized racism, or a person of color doesn't have that, then the system of oppression is not working out as well. Like you're getting other people, I think what it is that it's white people getting Black people to oppress themselves so they don't have to do it. And that when if they do make it out of that type of oppression, then that's when white people would introduce themselves and then get into like, and then that's when they would participate fully into the racist, like one-on-one, if that makes sense. Like without internalized racism, you can't feed into the system of oppression, and that system of oppression wouldn't work after a while. It's not that simple as that, but breaking it down like that, I feel like is the best.
I feel like maybe teachers find that it's easier to teach just about slavery in a way, that it's simple, because when we're learning about like anything related to Black history, they always pick and choose, as we've been speaking about, what they teach. And so I think it's just become so accustomed that it's like, okay, we teach about slavery. Now we've got we've summed up Black history. We did it. Like, we're going to teach these kids how not to be racist because, they saw how horribly in the past we've treated Black people. And I really just think that when they're taught how, like by the school system, how to teach it, I think that's like one of the main things. Like, okay, teach about slavery, here's like, how to do it. And then they just set them off, because every single time we've learned about it, it's been basically the same exact things. It's like they just cut and copy the exact same, like, 5 paragraphs in a textbook. We read it, we discuss it, and that's it. So I feel like teachers they just need to do their own research. I mean, if the school's not going to provide it, which they do, they need to definitely provide more teaching. But I think it's teachers' jobs to go out and learn more so that they can teach their students the proper way and not kind of just half-ass it. Sorry.
I'm gonna try and answer what we encourage new allies to do next. And I'd say mostly like educating yourself, but also stop asking Black people to educate you, because like, it is so rude that this has been going on for 400 years and you're really trying to claim that you had no idea. And I wasn't taught my own history in the classroom. I had to go look that up for myself. And I think that it is just the bare minimum for you to do that for yourselves. And I think that's all. Like, I think really people should be embarrassed to ask Black people, oh, what am I supposed to do? Like, it is so, like, Google is so free. Like, that is such a free and easy resource to tell you exactly what to do. There are so many articles at this point. I just think that's pretty much the first thing you need to do. Educate yourself, and then be vocal, but don't speak over Black voices, and listen, and don't try to tell someone, well, maybe you just didn't, don't gaslight Black experiences, because they felt that way for a reason, and trying to just fix, oh, this one instance, like you just didn't hear it right. That's not the big issue. That's treating a symptom and not the cause. So there you go.
Yeah, also adding on to that, if you ever feel exhausted, remember that you can walk out of that. You can leave. You can stop doing the work that you're doing, and you can go about your life, and it'd be normal. And there are millions of people who can't do that. And your work will save them.
And going off of those things, for white people, they need to be willing to call out people, like when they see it, even if there's no Black people in the room. If you hear something if someone says it's problematic, it's your responsibility to speak up if you really care. It shouldn't always be on the Black people to speak up when someone says something wrong about race and stuff like that.
Amanda Seales actually has an interesting like podcast called Small Doses, and she speaks about like kind of like a Black person in a specific situation where they're like pretty much the only Black person, and like white people always coming up to them asking them questions and about like race and all that stuff. And like in that situation, it's completely like most likely it's not okay, and like we're very annoyed when you do that. But then aside from that, there are some Black people or people of color that do take on that role of like educating, and those are the people to go to. You know what I mean? Like just don't take the random Black person that you see and then expect them to be like the cultural ambassador. It's not going to work that way. And so just if somebody is saying that they are a cultural ambassador and that they will speak to you and engage in conversations like that, then do it. Go ahead, right? Do you. But aside from that, like if you just see a random Black person, do not do that.
Speaking off of being exhausted and talking about the same stuff we always talk about, but also with what's going on in the world, in this country right now, with all the police brutality that's being held in the news, and the amount of comments saying, you know, I'm not Black, but I mourn with you, I cry with you, I understand that I will never understand, I'm here for you, you know, I want to see a change happen, you know, like, how are you feeling? And just reading all those comments and receiving all those comments, it gets frustrating because you're saying all of these things, but you're not doing anything about it. And most recently for us with social media, like last week we had a social media blackout when everyone posted the Black squares in solidarity to the Black Lives Matter movement, and to help sign all the petitions, and to donate money, and to help give the Black community a voice. However, people are treating it as a trend because people who've never said anything about Black Lives Matter nor bothered to look on the TV just got a Black square off the internet, put it on their Instagram with no context whatsoever. And the question I have is, how do we teach people to not treat Black Lives Matter as a trend?
The fact that we have to teach people that, like, what? I'm sorry, that doesn't make any sense in my mind. So if you think that it's a trend, you're the problem. That's my point here. I have nothing else to say.
Yeah, the Black squares really frustrated me because I saw people who posted the Black square, and underneath they had one of their friends, "I'm so proud of you." And that was the only thing she posted. The only thing she posted. Like, that is the epitome of performative activism. Like, whew, I was just so angry. I was like, you can't even post what other people are posting. You can't even share in your story. Like, it is so simple. Like, Instagram has made it so simple to be an activist at this point. Like it's so simple. There's just so many things that people are sharing. So to me, it feels like if you aren't posting anything, if you aren't sharing anything, like, honestly, it feels like you're actively working against it, because it's like, it is so easy. There's so many people doing it. It's not even uncool to do it at this point. Like, what is your excuse? That's all I have to say.
Oh, also something that I forgot, we need to stop, like, what is it? What's the words? I forgot. We need to stop applauding fish for swimming. Like, if you're going to a protest, if you're posting, good for you, but don't expect me to say, thank you so much, because you should be doing that anyways.
Yeah, to add on to that, literally yesterday on my story, I went on a huge rant about people who I know damn well, excuse my language, I know they are damn well sitting at their home doing nothing during coronacation, and they don't want to post a single thing. They just want to pretend like it's not their problem because they don't experience it themselves. And I think that is the biggest disrespectful thing that you could do. And I know I yelled at so many of my friends who just posted the Black squares on that Tuesday, Blackout Tuesday. And I was like, okay, so you're just showing this one thing and you're doing it because it's a trend. And I know you're doing it because it's a trend because you're my friend and I know how you are. You need to, if you're going to be my friend, you need to show that you support my life, that my life matters. Because if I were to be shot dead, killed in the street, raped, any of that stuff, and you wouldn't care, that's concerning to me. I would not consider you a friend. So to me, I need to, if you want to be my friend, I need to see you fighting the same rights as I would do for you. That's it.
Going off of what Kalia just said, when the whole George Floyd incident blew up and everyone started being activists all of a sudden coming out the blue and, you know, just posting about change but doing nothing about it, I texted my own friends from Wellesley and outside of Wellesley, what would you do if it was me that was found dead? Or if you witnessed it, would you videotape my own incident being out there broadcasted? And they said, you know, I would absolutely do something if it was you. You know, I would definitely like not even videotape it. I would go in and fight the cops myself if it was you. And it's nice to hear that, but it's also one, I will never know if that's actually going to happen unless it actually happens, God forbid. But it's also, you're only saying that because I asked you first. If I would never have texted you through any of all of this, you would not have reached out first. And that's what is also an issue with some friendships, is that if one person never spoke up about it, then how are you going to expect something to happen? Because you have to help them, you have to do everything for you. Black people should not be giving them tips and handing off like stories just to hear and say. And like what Sierra was saying, we can't give you guys all high fives and a cookie just for going to a protest or signing petitions. Don't tell us that you went to a protest. Don't post that you went to a protest. Don't tell us that you donated money, because you telling us is not going to make us feel any better. It's going to make you feel better because you want the validation. I have another question.
Yo, can I real quick?
Oh yeah, you can go.
I will say that for me, you know, this whole thing has been so draining that it almost feels futile to go down the route of not necessarily giving the benefit of the doubt. And it's almost like a devil's advocate sort of case. But if a child starts acting a child, I'm not going to reduce myself to be a child. I'm going to be an adult, and I'll proceed with the most I guess, reasonable course of action. So if someone online is not being authentic or is pursuing some other sort of intention, I'm not going to waste my energy, which is already being spent in so many other different ways, to go and ridicule that person. Instead, I'm going to seek out authenticity, because I have found a lot of people who are actually trying to make a difference, but they simply don't know how. Because no matter how you look at it, this is unprecedented, especially with the scale social media has brought it to be. Social media wasn't existing when MLK was around. And so a trend can easily be reduced or confused, right? And because this is really the first time a trend has been able to do something like this, or a trend has been existing while something like this exists. So if I was to provide a call to action, it wouldn't be towards white people or people who aren't necessarily at the epicenter of the occasion. I would probably try to change the attitude of people who feel the need to go into straining themselves for the purpose of changing people who are inauthentic and of the wrong mindset. Instead, pursue people who are of the right mindset, because it's really about the heart, right? What that person is trying to do from the deepest part of their heart. So, and that will speak for itself. If you find authenticity, it will speak for itself, because they will end up doing great change, especially if guided. So I personally have tried to stay away from the idea of even the whole Black Square thing. I barely knew about what was going on because I just distanced myself from it. I knew that I would have drained so much of my energy trying to understand that thing and trying to make it what it wasn't, that I didn't even want to partake. So because there's much more meaningful ways to go about living in this time. So that's all I have to say.
And can I interject for like a quick second? I just want to make it extremely clear, when you post something on social media, it's staying there. Like, it's serious. Like, you just posted something, you just posted your beliefs. It doesn't matter if it's on your private story. It doesn't matter if it's on some weird account. If you post something on social media, it is serious. And like, and why I'm specifically referencing this is because there was a specific incident where a student decided to put something about the protests on his social media, on his private story on Instagram. And then when somebody on his private story exposed him and then sent it to somebody else and then sent it through to whatever, he got upset that other people were posting what he posted on social media. If you are posting something on social media, expect that to get out. And if you can't back up your statements, then too bad. You shouldn't have posted it in the first place. And to that comment as well, it said something about like, I'm so sick and tired of all these social media posts. I'm sick and tired of seeing another unarmed Black person getting killed. So don't come at me with social media posts. You can ignore that. You can block somebody. You can unfollow them. Don't give me that BS. That's BS. And like, if you're on here and y'all are doing that, just know that everything that you put on social media, it's gonna stay there. Somebody's gonna figure it out. Somebody's gonna send it to somebody else, and da-da-da. That's gonna happen. And number two, you better be able to back up your statement.
Going off of the media, why is the Black men's life more out there than the Black woman's life? Meaning, how come the country is only focused when a Black male is killed for being who he is versus the white woman being killed for who she is?
We learned about this in DAB. Isn't it called intersectionality? Please tell me if I'm right, Yasmin. Yeah.
You're right.
Okay. I think it's because think of it as like a graph. Let's just say a graph, okay? And then you Sierra, I can see you talking. Can somebody explain it better than I can?
Intersection. It's literally, think about going to a road
yes.
and getting in the middle of an intersection. That is what that is.
Yeah. And so basically there's each end of the spectrum. There's like being a male, and there's being white, and there's being a female, and there's being Black. And when you fall in the middle of that intersection, that means that you are experiencing all of these things at once, and people don't care about you as much because you have all of these like factors that in society doesn't see as better, I guess. So like, if you are a Black male, you have the advantage because you are a male. But if you are a Black woman, you don't have the advantage because you are Black and you are a woman. If you are a white cisgender male, then you're basically at the top of the hierarchy and you have no problems coming your way because you don't fall under any of the I'm just gonna stop because I don't know how to describe
it. James Baldwin said, what did he say? The most neglected person in America is the Black woman. And that's, I mean, because basically like women and Black, that's two strikes against you right away, you know? So it's like, I also feel like it comes down to like white women's fetishization. Shit, I'm not saying that right, but of Black men. And so like you have these white women fighting for the Black men, but when it comes to Black women, they're silent. But even in this case, I feel like some of those white women have been silent too. So.
And then imagine being a Black trans woman. Like, imagine that.
Trans,
lesbian,
any of that stuff.
Any of that, like, it's so much worse, in my opinion, at least. Don't quote me, but like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's so much worse. You have a whole different experience, and you are also being neglected as well. So.
Yeah, I also like during these times, like I've had a discussion with Yasmin, but I felt like very selfish for like when everything was going on and everyone was talking about George Floyd. And I'm like, what about Breonna? Yeah, I just saw a post about Rihanna last week. What about the girl that was thrown off of a rooftop, not a rooftop, a balcony, and made it look like a suicide by police? Where was that? Because I didn't see that on social media. And no one's getting them justice. So I'm like, if I get shot dead in the middle of the street, are people going to care about me? Am I just going to be a hashtag for 5 minutes? Or are these people getting in trouble? Because I need that to be guaranteed.
How do you feel about the term all cops are bad? Or ACAB?
Well, I agree. I'm sure there are some good people, but all cops are bad because the institution itself is broken. I mean, it was founded literally to catch runaway slaves. So if you're starting like that, it's not going anywhere good.
Yeah, and the fact that the system is bad, like, even if you are a quote unquote good cop, you're gonna do bad things at some point because that's what you're being told to do. Like, the drug laws in this country are so, I guess, stacked against people of color and Black people that even if you claim to be a good cop, you're gonna end up, you know, doing things that are gonna harm Black communities, even if you don't claim that that's your intention.
And there are so many stories of good cops, basically like being kicked out of the police force or just being harassed for trying to stand up against bad cops. So it's like, and eventually they get kicked out. So it's like, are there really good cops? Or like, good cop means you're standing up against the bad cops. If you're not doing anything, you're not a good cop.
And like in the case of George Floyd, like there were 4 cops there. You mean to tell me that in a random group of 4 cops, not one of them is good enough to stop what's going on there and speak up? Like, that's just crazy to me that you can tell me that there's all these good cops, but we just don't see them.
I have a slightly different opinion. I get what you guys are saying. I totally get it. And I don't want, like, I'm not like, whatever. I just think that this is a hard one because they are playing, like, cops are playing into the system to oppress certain people. Like, it could be people with mental issues, it could be like Black people, it could be people of color, like in general. And so, but I think the term itself, I find to be not completely fair because an individual could be, for example, I went to DC over the summer, and this guy who was working for the FBI, a Black dude, he was saying, well, and someone did mention this, and he was saying, well, I'm trying to change the system from within. And so I think that's fair to me. Like, if you're trying to change the system from within, and also people are trying to change the system from the outside and not be a part of that system, then I think that's fair. I think if you're not coming in with that mentality, then that's when I can see that you are not a bad person, but just I don't know. I think people are just some people are trying to change the system within, and I don't want to label them as bad.
I mean, I get what Yasmin's saying, and I get what everyone else has been saying. I mean, Alex's point really stood out to me about how there was those 4 cops and how come none of them were these quote unquote good cops. But I think we also need to look at the whole institution and how there's not enough racial training and not enough training in general, because there's also so many incidents of cops attacking people with mental issues. And so I think overall, right now, I feel like we mainly should focus on how we can change what we have already so that incidents don't continue to happen. I think it needs to be a requirement that body cameras, like every cop has to turn on their body camera. And that won't stop, who's to say that will stop anyone? But I think it's one more level of like accountability for them to have, which is really important. And there just needs to be a lot of policy changes within the police department.
I think also that with like, I don't know how to explain this. That like, I think a lot of people from the outside perspective looking in have missed the point of the movement and haven't really taken a full scope of the fact that like this is systematic racism. This isn't just the police officers. This is the education system. This is the law, like the laws that are put in place. This is like literally the whole world put against a group of people. And it's like, along with police reform, there needs to be reform everywhere. And I think a lot of people from the outside perspective are like, well, this is only about police brutality. Like, this has nothing to do with me. And it's like, especially in Wellesley, I'm sorry, I don't mean to call it Wellesley, but a lot of people think that this is so far from their realities. And it's like, racism is happening in your schools. Like, your kids are witnessing racism. Like, the life that you live in Wellesley is an effect of racism. It's an effect of redlining. It's an effect of a bunch of things. So like, this isn't far from you. This is a reality for you that you choose to not look at.
Yeah, and to add on to Sierra's, I think that the Black at Wellesley page has really like opened a lot of like white Wellesley people's eyes, because that page went from 0 followers to 1,200 followers in a matter of 2 freaking days. All these people around here didn't realize that half the racism was going on. They're like now seeing it. And they're like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that all of this was going on, because they were so blind to the bubble that they live in. They thought that Wellesley didn't experience racism, so I'm not going to contribute to this movement. It doesn't affect me. But clearly it affects you. Just because you're white and you don't experience it firsthand does not mean that it's not present. So just mad, sorry.
And also, like, I want to highlight that like a police brutality issue did happen in Wellesley, even though it was like 20 years ago. And Michelle can tell everyone about this, like, because she knows about it the most. But there was a basketball player, the Celtics player, D. Brown, who was literally like, he was falsely accused of stealing by a white woman. And 6 or 7 cops pull up on him with guns and is like aiming their guns at him. So that happened in your town. Like, this is not exclusive to Wellesley. So I don't want to hear anything about like police brutality doesn't happen. It does in your town.
Yeah, racism is just so normalized in Wellesley that for a long time, I feel like I'd see it all the time and just be like, oh, you know, this, whatever. I don't know what else to do in this situation. And like, it literally took me to like leave Wellesley and go to like New York City, which is a lot. It's just full of way more diversity, to realize like, no, like this kind of shit is not, this kind of stuff is not okay. And like, I can say like, this is like, this needs to change. Like, I feel like I felt it all the time because I have a twin sister and she's literally undergoing a different experience at the same time as me. Like, just because our skin colors are different, like we look so similar and it's just our skin colors, and that changed our experience completely.
Second to last question, and this question is about white privilege. And like last week, 2 weeks ago, I read an article about that if it wasn't for all the protests, they were not going to charge the officer who killed George Floyd. And when I read that first headline, it just made me so upset, because he was not going to get prosecuted. He was not going to get fired, nothing, if nobody, or the entire country, let alone the entire world, went out and protested against it. And I'm reading that officers who have killed other victims in the past, such as Trayvon Martin, Tamir Rice, they're getting rehired. And the amount of all the articles that I searched up with all of the Black Lives Lost, it was so upsetting to read that charges were not filed, charges were dropped, they were not even convicted, and you know, they just got fired and got off easy. And for the people who think white privilege is not real or not want to acknowledge white privilege at all, white privilege is real. And the question I am trying to ask is how are we going to, I don't want to say educate, but how are we going to have white privilege be relevant and known, and it's not something that Black people are making up?
I feel like white privilege needs to be seen as a white issue. Like, this is not a Black person's issue to fix. Like, personally, like I've kind of always for a really long time seen myself as like kind of my job as a person of color with white privilege to speak up for people of color, because I know that my voice gets heard more just because people assume I'm white. Like I've seen it a billion times, and I feel like all my friends are posting, people I know that are my friends are posting about Black Lives Matter, because that's how they show that they love and support me, because that's what you do when you love and support someone. Like, I see people, you know, posting for like, you know, cancer fundraisers or whatever. I feel like white people should be using their white privilege to end white privilege. That's all, you know, like if you call any Black person, if you maybe you just look up to a Black person, like a famous basketball player or whatever, if you actually care about their existence, then you should be using your white privilege to protect their lives. That's all.
Also, if you want a mixed baby, you need to be working to help your child, your future child's life, because that's going to be your child. That's going to be your husband. That's going to be your baby father. You need to start working to change that.
I was gonna say that one thing that I would say Black people can do is just be present, right? Do the best you can to be the most you can in any given circumstance and poke the bear. Because if you're there, you're gonna point out the ugliness that lies within the privileges that you don't have. So if you are in your firm, you're the darkest man you could possibly be. You're just representing who you are, your people, and you don't get the opportunity purely because you're Black, it will show, especially if you are the one with the credentials. That's why if you showed up the reason why I'm in China, right, is because I wanted to point out the discrepancy that lies within their understanding of what a Black person is and what a Black person is. And it mainly lies in the lack of conversation, the lack of the Black presence. There are no Black people to represent themselves, so they simply hold these prejudices without being tested. So a privileged circumstance arises because nobody's there to represent themselves. Nobody's there to represent the people or the potential that their people could contribute. So don't shrink back. Instead, be as present as you can. It's like one of the most devastating things about police brutality lies in the fact that these lives were stolen from them with no real reason for their lives now not existing. And so you have to ask yourself then, as a person with my life ahead of me, do I even have a right to just sit back, right? As a Black boy who has opportunity, is there any, I don't know, hang on, let me think. Yeah, I struggle with motivation at times. And so where does that come from? It comes from, you know, that sort of idea that I haven't got what other people have. I as a person can't do what other people can do, and it's a lie, right? And that is what perpetuates the privilege, the idea of what privilege is. And I think the only way to truly remedy that, like with the best sort of effort, is for Black people to rise in Black excellence and do what they do in the setting that they want to do. Pursue your dreams, pursue whatever you want to pursue without that limitation put on yourself. So, yeah.
One thing I kind of want to add on to Bobo's point is just that I feel like there's a lot of, I don't know, I know that people of color are really feeling like, Black people are really feeling like they have to be posting and doing all this stuff, but I think that it's okay to take a social media break, and that there is rebellion in just being a happy Black person. Like, that is doing something, and if that's all you can do for that day, like, that is enough. And I just think you just have to take care of yourself. And when you take care of yourself, then you can continue fighting.
Yeah, I just wanted to share something. So the other day I was just scrolling through some page about this white woman, and she was saying how she didn't understand why Black people always feel the need to voice their opinions about stuff and feel like they're always the victim, and saying, oh, my people are getting killed, police brutality this, police brutality that. And then she was like, what about the Asians? What about the Native Americans? What about the Hispanics? Like, what about them? You don't see them complaining, so where are you? And oof, if I could reply to that woman, I swear on my life, it's not even the fact that people of like Black people are complaining. It's the simple fact that currently there is an issue with police brutality with the Black community. So we are going to obviously speak out about that issue. It doesn't mean that you can like degrade or demote our voices because you think that just because other people aren't speaking and using their voice that we can't. Those groups of people are probably using their voice, like it's just probably in a different way, and they aren't being as marginalized or like disrespected as we are in the same way. Like it's just like those groups have more privilege than Black people in different ways. They are still people of color, yes, but they still hold a different type of privilege compared to the Black community. So I think that it was just very wrong and very narrow-minded of her to say something like that. And if anybody just wants to speak on that, I don't know.
I don't know why I get so surprised when I hear stuff like that. Like, you think after like so many years of living and hearing so many ignorant and racist comments that you'd just be like numb to it. It's just like, it's insane to me. And like what Julia was saying, like in those moments, like you have to take care of yourself. And like, I feel like in yes, we never did that really, because we felt like it was our responsibility to educate our teachers, administrators, community members, fellow classmates. Like it felt like it was all on our shoulders and that we couldn't do much to change that. And it was mainly like, I feel like part of the pressure is that we have Black and brown children that are coming up after us. And who's going to be there for them? Like, if we don't change it now, then who's going to do it for them? But like that thinking is so like detrimental to like mental health, only because like of how much responsibility we put on ourselves and other people put on us, and a result of like not taking care of ourselves at all. Like I feel like I was doing yes stuff all the time. Like, and I know most of you guys agree here, if not all. And so I still think that like the fact that not too many white people are in yes, like y'all need to be the ones that are like, you know, on the ground helping out. Like we need y'all, like only because like it's exhausting. And in the moments where you see like a Black person die, like, and it being caught on tape or you're hearing about it on the news, like in those moments, I am mentally exhausted and I don't want to talk to any of you. I don't want you to hit me up or anything like that. All I want you to do is your part. That's all I want, to just do your part so I don't have to. And that's what I really want to emphasize. And that, like, I just can't believe somebody could still be ignorant and racist during this time. I shouldn't be surprised, but I still am, because I feel like I have more hope in people to like just be completely numb to that kind of reaction.
Moving on to our final question, which is going to be in 2 parts. And the question is, do you like being Black? And what do you want our viewers to take away from tonight's chat?
I love it. I wouldn't change it. I mean, like, I got spice to me. I got some chocolate. That's really, it just makes me different. I like that. And I used to not like it. I used to think that I should change myself because of the people I was around. But it really hit me in junior year that like my Blackness is special and God made me this way for a reason. to add some spice, to add some chocolate into these boring people's lives. No, I'm just kidding. But like, I think that it's really like a privilege of mine to be the way that I am, and I wouldn't change it. So yeah.
To add on to that, like I just got, actually it's so funny because I just got this article from a teacher, and she was saying, she was saying, no, the article was saying that like I love my blackness. That's not the problem. The problem is what other people do when and how they react to my blackness. That's what I don't like. I don't like the racist comments or the ignorance, and like who would? Like if that was your child, you wouldn't like it either. But yep, I love my blackness at this point. Like, too bad. And I hope you guys didn't expect another reaction because nope.
Yeah, I'll just
I'd say
say,
most of
you can go.
I'd say most of I guess my regard for what it means to be Black comes from the identity that Black people carry with them, right? So it kind of gets tainted by what they teach me to believe about myself. It gets tainted by what I think I'm capable of pursuing or being in life. That's why so many young boys needed that. I was talking about that Miles Morales, that Black Spider-Man, because it matters to see Black people being represented in the most obscure and strange ways, because we need to know that we're capable of anything too. If someone can swing from buildings in New York, I should be able to do that. And it doesn't necessarily matter that, wait, Mom, I'm sorry. My mom's trying to hand me some. I'm sorry. Yeah. So yeah, as a Black person, my identity needs to transcend beyond what I've been given, and I think that kind of coincides with what Yasmin is saying, where it's not necessarily what I regard about what it means to be a Black person is what's been done to my identity, and I think that really has been damaged over time, and people haven't done anything to remedy that. It's kind of like starting at the core of the issue. I also think that I'm a Christian, so I derive a lot of my identity in something that transcends being human. It's about finding something greater than myself, and so that I also try to emulate that in how I carry myself. So yeah, I don't know. Just be there, be present, create, and give other Black kids, other young people growing up something to aspire towards, and a vision for what it means to be Black. So yeah.
Yeah, I'll keep it simple on the first question. I love being Black. And then the second part about takeaways for people, I would say just continue to learn, like use spaces like this to learn from Black experiences and hear Black voices. And then really try to do your part, like whether it's in your city, town, workplace, when you see something going on or an issue with like equity and stuff like that, speak up and try to make the changes that are necessary for those spaces to really be representative of everyone and not just the white voices, maybe in the power. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I'm just gonna keep it simple too. I like being Black. I don't know what it would be like to be any other race. I don't think I would be satisfied. I would say be comfortable being uncomfortable. And with a quote from Michelle Obama, let me get it real quick because I think I said it in Dab, but don't ever underestimate the importance you can have, because history has shown that courage can be courageous and hope can take on a life of its own. That's all I gotta say.
I was just gonna say that I absolutely love being Black. I know I look white, but I'm closest to the Black side of my family, and like Black culture is amazing. Like white culture wishes they had Black culture. Like that's why they steal from us all the time. And I don't know. Yeah. And I think the one thing I want people to leave here with is, listen to Black voices, amplify Black voices, and educate yourself. And look at Black at Wellesley. That's really important.
Also, that reminded me of like a saying I heard. It's like, y'all want our rhythm, but not our blues. You know, because rhythm and blues, but okay. And what I would want people to leave with, because I didn't answer it before, it's more than just reading a book. Like, you got to do, this is like lifetime of dedication that you have to put into this. And you got to do more than that. You can't just read a book and expect to know like everything about Black people or about race and all that stuff. You have to do more than that. You have to be dedicated, and you have to show your dedication through your actions. And if that's not being done, then what's the point? Why would you be here? So
So I'm biracial. Similarly to Julia, I'm white passing. But I love being Black. I think it's given me a sense of community. The culture is amazing. Just everything regarding Blackness is beautiful. I don't know. I just like. I wouldn't change that at all. And then what I want people to take away is similar to what everyone else is saying. This isn't it. Like, there needs to be more. Educate yourself, definitely. Reading the stories on Black at Wellesley, really, like, I didn't hear half of them, and like I'm always hearing everyone's stories, but some of them just really shocked me. And I think that's important, to be listening to Black voices and hearing what actually happens and not thinking that you know everything, because no one knows everything. You're always learning constantly. So just be open to that. And yeah.
I love being Black. However, it has taken me a very, very long time to love the color of my own skin, because just based what we just talked about tonight, with all the stories and what we see on the news and what we learn in school, it just makes me hate myself. Like, I used to hate myself, and I used to try really hard to be white or to fit in with everybody. And it took not so long ago for me to actually embrace the own color of my skin, because we have flavor, we have the complexion, we have all the talents and abilities that people are finally noticing and finally being appreciative of. And my takeaway that I want everyone to know and to be aware of is, your silence is a luxury. And when you are choosing to be silent, or choosing to not speak up, or speaking up when you just feel like you have to speak up, that is a problem. And you have to be uncomfortable to be comfortable, but it's also, if this was your friend or your child, what would you want done? What action would you take? Because you can't just pick and choose who you're going to take care of and who you're going to fight for. If you're fighting for one, you're fighting for all. Thank you.
I just wanted to say a huge thank you to everybody who spoke today. If you read through the chat after this, you'll see that there are many, many people in the audience who are equally and even more grateful. And we have some very passionate voices in the chat. And I hope to see you all on June 30th for the second part of this series. Please note that it's going to be broadcasted on the YES, the Young Ethnic Scholars YouTube channel. That information will be available on Facebook. It'll be in flyers. It'll be on What's Up Wellesley, on all the channels where you might have found the information to this. And that will be more of a discussion, like an interactive discussion, brainstorming all these ideas that you see in the chat regarding professional development and ideas for our education system, for our government. All of those ideas are welcome and encouraged. So with that, I am going to end the live stream. Thank you all for coming, and we'll see you on June 30th.